If you're studying for the June SAT and need a last-minute tips and tricks guide from someone who regularly scores 780s, 790s on the actual SATs, you're in the right place. I'll be going over unorthodox ways that no other SAT video has covered that goes over pattern recognition, when you should be drawing, when you should be using Desmos, why you shouldn't panic when you see long word problems, and what you need to memorize that always shows up on the SAT. So first, let's start with pattern recognition. So why this is so useful is because these questions normally show up on the first few questions of each module, and normally you could solve them in like 30 seconds, but by recognizing the pattern, you could solve them in like a second. So it's a very big time saver. So let me show you an example. So you see this one, it says if x over 8 is 5, what is the value of 8 over x? So the first thing you should notice here is that they're reciprocals, right? So that we know that x over 8 is 5. I'm trying to find 8 over x. And since that's just a reciprocal, we just flip it. So then it will just be 1 over 5. So that's how you get your answer in like a second. Now let's get the next one. If x over y is 4 and 24x over ny is 4, what is the value of n? So what is the first thing you should recognize in this problem? Well, it's the fact that they both equal each other because they both equal 4. So just set them equal to each other first. And then what does n have to be so that 24x over ny simplifies to x over y? Well, n has to be 24 then, right? So that's how you solve this one. So for pattern recognition, it's not absolutely like necessary, but it will save you a lot of time on like the first few questions of the module. And with that saved time, you could use it to solve like the more complicated, more harder, complex problems that appear towards the end of each module. So yeah. And the next thing I'd like to go over is why you shouldn't panic on the SAT. And this is very important. This is probably one of the most important parts of the video because when you panic on the SAT, you start to doubt yourself, and then you can't solve problems that you could normally solve. So I'll be going over maybe like 4-ish examples as to like why you shouldn't panic and why you should, stay calm on the SAT for the math. So let's look at the first one. The function h is defined by h of x is equal to 4x plus 28. The graph of y is equal to hx in the xy plane has an x-intercept at a, 0 and a y-intercept at 0, b, where a and b are constant. What is the value of a plus b? All right, off the bat, this question seems very confusing, right? Like, what do you mean you need to add up a plus b? I don't even know what the x and y intercepts are. But let's just calm down. Just start with the basics, right? We have a function, and then we're trying to find the x and y intercepts. Do we know how to find the y-intercept with a given function? Yes. In this case, what is it? It's just 28. So then b is 28. Okay, how do you find the x-intercept though? I don't know how to find the x-intercept. Well, if you don't know how to find the x-intercept, it's okay because they literally give it to you. It's a, 0, right? So that means the y is 0. So we just set this equal to 0. And then we get 4x is equal to negative 28. We know that x is then negative 7, right? So then we know that a is then negative 7. And now that we have a and b, we just add them. 28 minus 7, you get 21. That's how you get your answer of a, right? It seemed like a very complicated problem, but it's quite simple, right? So just stick to the basics, stick to what you know, and eventually you'll get the right answer. Let's look at the next one. What is the smallest solution to the given equation? Okay, this equation right off the bat is very confusing. It already looks very confusing. You have square roots and you have a square. But just go back to what we remember. If we have a square root and we try to get rid of it, what do? We just square it. And in this case, we square both sides to make it equal. Let's just square both sides then. Then you get x minus 2 squared is equal to 3x plus 34. And then, but how do we find the smallest solution from this equation? How are we supposed to do that? Well, I don't know. Maybe let's just factor out x minus 2 squared first. X squared minus 4x plus 4 is equal to 3x plus 34. And how about let's just move it all to one side. X squared minus 7x minus 30 is equal to 0. And what you notice, it's a quadratic. And the graph of a quadratic is a parabola, right? And then in this case, it's facing up because the x squared is like positive here. And then the smallest solution will be the vertex because that's where the graph is the smallest. So if we graph this into Desmos and we find where the smallest is, the smallest solution is the x value of the smallest point. So if you plug into Desmos, you find the right answer. So in this case, like everything seemed very complicated. Like how are we supposed to find the smallest solution? But if you just go step by step, just follow what you know. Like if you have square root, then square it. And then if it's like x minus 2 squared, like just factor it out. Maybe simplify it. You might find something. If you keep doing that, then you'll eventually find the answer. Okay? Now let's look at this one. A window repair specialist charges $220 for the first 2 hours of repair plus an hourly fee for each additional hour. The total cost for 5 hours of repair is $400. Which function gives the total cost for X hours of repair? Okay, so you know that the first 2 hours is 220. We know that the total cost for 5 hours is 400. So 400 minus 220, you get 180, right? And then so 180 for the 3 hours after the first 2 hours. So we divide it by 3 to find the hourly rate is 60. So we say like 60x, and then y-intercept is, let's just say 220 maybe. And then boom, we get our answer of B. However, we have to make sure to double check. So let's actually plug in a value for x. Let me write this cleaner first. Alright, so let's say x is 5, right? Because we know that's 400. If x is 5, then that'll be 300 plus 220. Wait a minute, that is not 400. So that can't be the answer. Okay, then let's try, I don't know, right? Especially when you're on the SATs, and I've seen this question appear like a few times, and it's normally towards like the end part. And if like you're panicking and like this is like your first thought, right? 60x plus 220, and it just doesn't work, you start to panic and you don't know what to do. But for this question, it's actually pretty simple, right? We know that 5 hours is 400, and they already give us 4 different equations. So just plug 5 into x and see which one gives 400, right? So we know B doesn't work. Let's see A. All right, 60 times 5 is 300 plus 100. That's 400, so that one works. How about C? 80 times 5, that also gives 400. That works. And D doesn't work. Okay, now we're down to 2 options, right? So they both work, but now let's just think of a different x value we could put. In this case, they already give, for the first 2 hours is $220. So let's use that. Plug 2 into x. First one, 60 times 2 is 120 plus 100 is 220. So that one works. How about C? 80 times 2 is 160. So that doesn't work. So then that's how you get your answer of A, right? So this case, it's really important to show that you shouldn't really panic when you don't get the right answer the first time. But you should just take a step back and really see what the problem is asking you. And in most cases, or in some cases, you could actually use the answer to your favor. Yeah. And then this is the last question for this part. The first term of a sequence is 9. Each term after the first is 4 times the preceding term. If W represents the nth term of the sequence, which equation gives W in terms of n? Alright, this is very, like, I keep saying this, but this is, like, the wording is very confusing in this problem. But as we did with every other previous problem, just take it step by step. Do what you already know to solve this equation. Okay, so we know the first term is 9, okay? Each term after the first is 4 times the preceding term. Okay, so then the next term would be 36. The next term after that would be 36 times 4. And then we're trying to find the equation. Well, if you don't know like the equation formula, it's okay because you could just plug in like n, like you plug in 1, 2, 3 for n, and if they give like respective values of 936 and that 36 times 4, then that's the right answer. Okay, so let's look at the first one. Let's look at A. If we plug in 1 for n, that'll be 36, not 9, so that doesn't work. How about B? If we plug in 1 for n, that'll be 4, so that doesn't work. How about C? If we plug in 1 for n, that'll be 36, so that doesn't work. How about D? If we plug in 1 for n, that'll be 9, so it does work. Boom. Alright, so this one is kind of similar to the last one where we just use the answer keys to find our answer. It could be a very complicated question if you panic, but if you just take a step back and see what this problem is asking you, it's very easy to get the right answer. So yeah, I think the lesson of this part is that you shouldn't panic on the SAT, and panicking only lowers your score because you're dumber when you start to panic. Yeah, just don't panic. So the next part is like when to draw. So you know how we all get that piece of paper, and some people use it, some people don't. Well, there's a few questions where you should actually be using the papers, specifically on like geometry questions, because it's just overall, it just makes the problem easier to answer. Alright, so let's go through a few examples. First one, triangle ABC and DEF are congruent, where A corresponds to D, B corresponds to E. Oh wait, no, A, B, and E are right triangles. The measure of angle A is 18. What's the measure of angle F? Okay, so we know that B and E are right triangles. We know that the triangle is a right triangle, obviously. So B here, E here, right triangles, and A, C, D, F, because they correspond to each other. We know that angle of measure A is 18. That means for this, since both the triangles are congruent, their angles are the same. So that means this is also 18. And then we're trying to find the measure of angle F, right? So to find it, well, we know that's 90 plus 18 plus measure of angle F is equal to 180, right? So we just do 108 plus measure of angle F is equal to 180. Then you do 180 minus 108 to get 62, 72. Yeah, 72. And then you get your answer of 72 for F. So this question, it's like you didn't have to draw it, but drawing it just made it like 10 times easier. And especially with the next example, it'll also make the question just more easier to understand. So let's look at this one. A square has side lengths that are 166 times the side length of square B. The area of square A is k times the area of square B. What is the value of k? Okay, so let's just draw a square. This is A, this is B. They are not drawn to scale. We call this the side length x, and then for A it's 166 times x because it's 166 times the side length of B. Okay, and how do you find the area of a square? This is the side length squared, right? So for this one is x squared, this one is 166 squared x squared. So 166 x squared is, let's see, that's 27,556 x squared is equal to that. And then the area of square A is k times the area of square B. So then what is k? Well, k is just 275.6. That's how you get your answer. I mean, this question, I feel like you would think that you don't really have to draw it that much because you could probably just do it in your head. But I think for most people, it's better if you draw it out. It just makes the problem more simpler. Let's look at this one. Alright, when you encounter like these type of questions, you should be drawing it. Okay, so in the right triangle RST, the measure of the angle R and S are 90 degrees. Okay, right off the bat, we know that if the measure of angle R and S is 90 degrees, we know that then T is the right angle. So I'm going to just draw that first, like this, R, S, T, like that. And then, okay, the value of sine R is root 15 over 4. What's the value of cosine S? Alright, the first thing you should know here is SOHCAHTOA. If you know it, that's good. If you don't know it, don't worry because it's pretty simple. Okay, so in this case, this is S stands for sine. And then OH, that's O is opposite, H is hypotenuse. And for here, C is cosine. A stands for adjacent, H is, again, hypotenuse. And T is tangent. And O is opposite, A is adjacent. So with this new knowledge, let's try to solve this problem. We know that the sine of R, what's sine? Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So first opposite, okay, root 15 over hypotenuse. Okay, and we're trying to find cosine S. What's cosine? That's adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent, that's root 15 over hypotenuse, which is 4. So that's how you get your answer of root 15 over 4. And I think like a common like struggle I had with like these type of problems at first was identifying which one is adjacent, which one is opposite. So just to like, I guess, emphasize it, we're trying to find the sine of R, right? So that's like this angle right here. This part is the adjacent because it's like right next to it. And you might think that this part also might be the adjacent, but no, that's the hypotenuse. And how we can like identify what the hypotenuse is like in a right triangle, it's like the longest part of it. So like boom, boom, boom. What's like the longest part? It's obviously this part, right? And that's the hypotenuse. So that's how you can identify the hypotenuse. And then this is like the opposite side. So then that's O. So yeah, that's like a little tip on how to like solve those types of problems. And then next we're gonna move on to things that you should memorize on the SAT that like always show up. Like every time I took like the actual SATs, these concepts always showed up. And it's like easier to memorize than like trying to solve it like the first time you see it, because memorizing it just makes the question like 20 times easier. So let's look at the first one. The measure of angle R is 2 pi over 3 radians. The measure of angle T is 5 pi over 12 radians, greater than the measure of angle R. What is the measure of angle T in degrees? Okay, so first thing you should realize is you want to convert radians into degrees. Radians into degrees. That's 180 over pi. And if you want to convert degrees into radians, it's just like reciprocal. It's pi over 180. Alright, so you should memorize this. It's honestly pretty just easy to memorize. Just memorize it and you'll be good for these type of questions. But if you don't memorize this, then you won't really know how to solve these types of questions. Okay. So measure of angle R is 2 pi over 3 radians. Okay, the first thing I do is just convert everything into degrees. So to do that, what do I have to do? 2 pi over 3 times 180 over pi. The pi should cancel out. And then 60. So that just becomes 120. 120 degrees. And we know that the measure of angle T is 5 pi over 12 radians greater. So just convert that into degrees too. To, what is that? 30. Boom, boom, 15. So that's just 75. So we know that the angle of measure T is 75 degrees greater than the measure of angle R. So we just add it to get 195, which is C as our answer. So this question is pretty simple, right? But if you don't know like the formula, then you won't be able to solve it. So memorize the formula. Next question, it's like these are like appear like the first few questions on the SAT, I think. But it just might be confusing if you just don't know it. So the thing you should memorize in this case is that first, okay, M and N are parallel lines, and T intersects them with the value of X. So in parallel lines, whenever there's like a parallel line and there's like a line that goes through it, like these, let's see, these two angles will always be the same. And then this angle and this angle is the same as these two angles. Okay? And the same thing applies for like these angles too. These angles are the same as these angles. And another thing you should know is that it's a line, right? Or this thing's a line. So that means that this angle plus this angle adds up to 180. So with that, let's try to solve this question. Okay? We know that this angle and this angle are the same. We also know that, so that's 33. Then we also know that this angle is also 33 because they're the same, right? This angle is also 33 degrees. Now if we're trying to find x, we know that this is a line. So what that means is that x plus 33 is 180. So x plus 33 is 180. So that gives us the answer of D. So this is, yeah, it's a pretty simple problem, but if you just know like what to do when you have parallel lines and a line that intersects them both, it's pretty simple. This one. Alright, this one is also equally as important as it always shows up on the SAT. And yeah, so for this question, no real solutions, right? There's like another thing you should know. If b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, that means there's two real solutions. And then if b squared is equal to 0, that's one real solution. Now, if b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, there's zero real solutions. And if you don't know what like a, b, and c are, they're just basically, you know, like the quadratic equation ax squared plus bx plus c. They're like the coefficients, right? So a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is like the last number with no variables. So now with this, let's try to solve this equation. So we know that the equation has no real solution. So what does that mean? That means we use this formula. And we're trying to find the least possible value of k. Okay. So if we're trying to use, we have to use this equation, and we have to get it in form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So let's just factor it out first. That'll be kx squared minus 56x is equal to negative 16. And we just do kx squared minus 56x plus 16 is equal to 0. Okay, now let's use the formula. What is b in this case? B is negative 56. So negative 56 squared minus 4ac. What's a? A is k. What's c? C is 16. And that has to be less than 0. Okay, first thing we do here is we just find the values. So what is 56 squared? That's 3,000 136 minus 64k has to be less than 0. Okay, so we have to find the smallest possible value of k, right? So then let's just move 64k to the other side. 3136 is less than 64k. We're trying to find the least possible value of k. So that means that it has to just be over 3,164. So let's just first divide by 64 to see what we get. And then we get you get 49. You get a whole number. But like the trick is that you can't put 49 because this 64k has to be greater than 3,136, not greater or equal to. So that means the next possible k we could use is 50. That's how you get your answer of 50. Now let's move on to the next section, which is when you should actually be using Desmos. Because, you know, there's a lot of like SAT Desmos videos, like they use like regression and everything. But honestly, I find that like super complicated. But there are like a few questions where Desmos actually helps and you should actually be using it. So these are like the questions that I am referring to. So the first one is that the graph of the equations intersect at point xy. What is the possible value of x? This you just plug into Desmos and you find a point where like they intersect and you just get your answer. Like this question, you should be using Desmos, right? You should be using Desmos because you automatically just get the answer. Like these are the type of questions that like are designed to like be used by Desmos. And let's look at the next one. Now, how many points of the graph does the equation intersect? Obviously, this one you should be using Desmos because like it's very easy to use Desmos for these types of questions. Like for graphing questions, like just use Desmos. And this one, for what value of x does the value reach its minimum? Again, use Desmos. Like that's like the only like easy option for these types of questions. So yeah, but I think like a tip is that you shouldn't actively try to use Desmos for every question, because if you do that, you're wasting time, because most of the questions aren't designed to be done by Desmos, but like people just found a way to do it. But there's actually like there's just an easier way to do it. Like I've like shown you throughout like the whole thing. There's just like tips and tricks, like when you should be drawing, like why you shouldn't be panicking, like pattern recognition. Like these are all like useful tips and tricks that like don't necessarily need Desmos to solve. So yeah, I think that's all of the tips and tricks I have, and I hope this helped a little bit, possibly. And just good luck on your SATs, and just make sure to, you know, get a good night's sleep before your SAT. And yeah, just enjoy the process. Bye.